We will not be confined.
We won't be told how to view the world.
We will experience true freedom.
We will live the game through our hands.
We will change the system.
The Nintendo 64, a console that... no. An opportunity that finally allowed one of the greatest game designers to show the world what direction 3D games would be taking for years to come. So let's see how it all happened. Ever since Miyamoto stepped foot into the gaming industry, he had ideas that was way ahead of his time. Even before the Super Famicom swept the world, he already envisioned how he wanted a game with a 3D environment to work. However, the FX chip in the Super Famicom wasn't nearly powerful enough to generate enough polygons. Hence, it wasn't until the N64 where he finally was able to bring his visions into reality through a title that needs no introductions, Super Mario 64. But honestly, Mario was only the beginning. With character movement and the camera system mastered, it was time for Miyamoto to take things to the next level in his other most treasured creation, The Legend of Zelda. It's 1995 and a short Zelda 64 teaser was shown at the Space World trade show. Fans were wowed by the graphics they saw. However, some critics doubted that the demo was even running on an actual N64. I mean, they probably thought to themselves, how on earth could a full-blown adventure game like The Legend of Zelda be designed in a complete 3D world on the N64? The console is powerful, but not that powerful. Right? Well, they were half right. Even Miyamoto was uncertain if the hardware could process a full 3D Zelda game. During the early stages of development, he planned a worst-case scenario where Ganon's castle would be a hub world and the entire game would be confined inside of it. Kinda like the paintings in Peach's castle, except they would have been Zelda locales. In fact, Miyamoto confirms that the Phantom Ganon battle was a remnant of this idea. Though a Mario 64 version of Zelda would have been interesting to see, it would have been too linear. So I'm actually glad it didn't turn out that way. Now that the game was taking place in the expansive Hyrule Kingdom, designer Yoshiki Haruhana figured it was important to create unique-looking characters to make sure players would be able to remember the locations of certain places. Though I seriously think some of the characters turned out a bit too unique. Okay, I want to ask a question to those of you who have played Ocarina of Time. What did you value most about the game? Perhaps the intricate dungeon puzzles? Link's arsenal of gadgets? Or maybe just trolling the disgusting fishing pond owner? Well, whatever it may be, all those ideas began with this. What you're seeing is chambara, a type of sword fight commonly used in Japanese samurai movies. In the case of Zelda, developer Yoshiaki Koizumi has wanted to implement the chambara style into the franchise ever since Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. But due to how weak the Famicom was, his idea wouldn't see the light of day until the N64 came into the picture. On a similar note, Miyamoto initially wanted the game to be in a first-person view, and only when an enemy appeared would the view change. But Koizumi was like, no freaking way, man, since he was half done designing Link's model. Luckily, the first-person view was scrapped in the end, since it turned out too boring. So back to the chambara. It's a great idea, isn't it? Fast-paced, intense 101 duels? That's a yes in my books. But there was still the question of how they were going to implement this into the game. Well, what better place than dropping by Toei Kyoto Studio Park, a place filled with ancient Japanese film culture, to get some ideas. So that's where director Toru Osawa and Yoshiaki Koizumi ended up paying a small visit. While wandering around the studio park, they eventually came across a ninja show. And what the two took away from this show alone gave birth to one of the most revolutionary game mechanic that has shaped combat in action games as we know today. And that was Z-targeting. Here's what Osawa had to say about the show. A number of ninjas were surrounding the main samurai, and one lashed out with the kusarigama. The lead samurai caught it with his left arm, the chain stretched tight, and the ninja moved in a circle around him. And if we examine Link versus an enemy, that's exactly what happens. Except the kusarigama would of course be imaginary. On the other hand, Koizumi saw the group of ninjas surrounding the samurai and realized that just like in action movies, the enemies would only confront the hero one by one no matter how many there were. With that, Link could now Z-target switch. Now of course we can't talk about Z-targeting without talking about the fairy that everyone loves, right? Well, according to Koizumi, Navi started off as nothing more than a little bland triangle whose sole purpose was to point out what object Link was targeting. Later on, she turned into a fairy. Yes, it started off as a cute girl fairy. But since the N64 couldn't handle it, she became a mere ball of light. And by the way, since the fairy's job was to navigate, Osawa gave her the name Navi.
Hey, look, listen.
With an intense 2.5 years of development, the game was finally released in November of 1998, called The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. At last, we're at the big daddy of them all, the very game that single-handedly branched the Zelda timeline into the confusing mess that it is now. Well, I'm not here to judge, I'm here to tell, so here we go. Following the era of prosperity, Hyrule was once again at war, one known as the Hyrulean Civil War. A lone mother fled into the Forbidden Forest, where she entrusted her baby to the Deku Tree. Raised as a Kokiri, it wasn't until the Deku Tree was near death that Link was tested for his courage. After passing, his adventure began, where he was sent to Hyrule Castle for a meeting with Princess Zelda. Ocarina of Time. What do I think of this game? Well, when I first played it on my cousin's N64, I was like, this game's pretty neat. Though of course, this was just the first 20 minutes or so, while I was still exploring Kokiri forests, cutting up signs and whatnot. But the moment I delivered the final blow to Goma, it was euphoria, exhilarating, and an absolute sense of satisfaction. Then to realize that this was only just the beginning, my mind was simply blown. While A Link to the Past introduced the staples into the Zelda franchise, Ocarina of Time converted it all into the third dimension with near perfection. Although some dungeons were infamous for their complexity, no one could deny the brilliant designs. However, according to the dungeon designer Eiji Aonuma, he had to deal with many discrepancies with the item designer Koizumi. Because they lacked experience in 3D design, things were very unorganized. Sometimes an entire dungeon would be finished, but a new item would pop up, causing disjointed puzzles. Though composing the dungeon music went much smoother. The Michael Jackson of Nintendo, Koji Kondo, returns as the composer. He specifically made the dungeon music very atmospheric and made sure that there was no melody for players to latch onto. One track that really sticks in my head to this very day was the Forest Temples. So eerie, yet so ambient. Now, besides all the wonderful things we've talked about, the most notable feature in this game is, of course, time travel. Believe it or not, in early stages of development, there was no time travel. No young Link, just plain old Link. However, Miyamoto came out of nowhere and said, "I want to see a cute little Link." This decision gave many of the designers and scriptwriters major headaches. Cause as we all know, time travel was nothing to play with, since even the slightest mistake would result in plot holes left and right. Through the journey of reading over 150 pages of developer interviews on Ocarina of Time alone, it's obvious we can't include every little detail. But there was one thing that was mentioned repeatedly, and that be Epona. Named after the goddess of horses in mythology, Epona was the first horse to be introduced into the Zelda universe. Back in the 60s, when Miyamoto was a mere child, Western film had a strong impact in Japan, namely cowboys. As a result, horse riding was ingrained in Miyamoto as he grew up. Now with the opportunity to create a 3D Zelda game, giving Link a horse was just second nature. Ocarina of Time was praised by critics and gamers alike. 2 remakes made its way onto store shelves in the coming years. The first one came out in 2002, called The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time Master Quest. The game is similar to Ocarina of Time with modified dungeons. This game started off as an expansion called Hyrule Zelda, planned to release on the N64 disk drive. However, the 64DD turned out to be a commercial failure, and later, Hyrule Zelda became Master Quest. It's not until almost 10 years down the road in 2011 that we got to see a true remake called The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time 3D. Most notable differences with this version are the cosmetics, gyroscope, and 3D effects. Following the success of Ocarina of Time, the pressure was on to push out another Zelda. So Miyamoto quickly gathered 70% of the former devs to begin production, and the codename of this project became Zelda Gaiden. Have you ever wondered how the notorious 3-day countdown came to be? Believe it or not, it came from a board game. Various ideas were thrown around in the early stages of development, but the one that really stuck was Koizumi's. Prior to being drafted into the team, he was in the middle of creating a board game that revolved around cops and robbers. How it worked was you had 1 week in game time to catch them, but in real time, you only had 1 hour. Koizumi decided to port this concept over to Zelda Gaiden. From there, the 3-day cycle was born. Miraculously, the dev team were able to complete the game in just 1 year, which is probably a record for Zelda games. Though reusing the same engine, plus rehashing models from Ocarina of Time probably sped up the process enormously. The game was released in October of 2000, called The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. The events pick up right after the ending of Ocarina of Time, where Navi abandons Link. Seriously, after all they've been through, no goodbyes or anything? She apparently just disappears into the heavens. Link, left confused, went searching for her. Through some unfortunate events, he loses his ocarina, gets turned into a Deku scrub, and finds himself in a parallel world called Termina. Soon realizing the Skull Kid under the control of Majora's Mask was causing the moon to fall and destroy everything, he set out to save the world. One of the first things you'll notice as you begin exploring the daunting world of Termina are the many familiar faces. The reason for this was because the devs wanted to give more insight into some of the characters found in Ocarina of Time, and this gets crystal clear as you talk to and observe the lives of these residents. You'll find that they aren't the usual NPCs with a line or two. A bunch of them have major issues waiting for you to unravel. Responsible for their design, Koizumi said he basically put everything that he has seen in his 30-something years on Earth. In fact, there are such a huge amount of these side quests that the main quest basically takes a backseat. In an interview, Miyamoto explains why instead of doing a game comprised of 8 dungeons, I wanted to make a compact entry in the Zelda series that could be replayed over and over, revealing greater depth with each playthrough. All this extra content actually forced the devs to have the expansion pack be a requirement to play the game. If you think about it, Miyamoto seriously had some balls making the player pay an extra $50 on top of the $60 the game had already cost. Personally speaking, I never had too much problems with the focus on side quests, but the main issue for me was the time limit. I'm talking about that dreadful 3-day countdown. When I first played Majora's Mask, I didn't really pay attention to what the style in Scarecrow had to say, hence I never realized that slowing down time was even possible. So I was literally rushing through the dungeons as fast as I could before being forced to reset time. This may have left a bad impression on me. And even after playing the inverted Song of Time, it still feels a bit uncomfortable having a timer plastered on the screen wherever I go. Overall though, I felt Majora's Mask was a unique addition to the Zelda franchise, given the time-specific side quests and the much darker tone. Like seriously, I can't begin to imagine the amount of pain Link goes through from simply putting on a mask. Alright, so after taking a look at how Zelda swept the world with its jump to 3D, it's time we take a step back into the portable realm. The Gameboy Color. From our previous episode, we saw how a full-fledged Zelda game could still be achieved on an old Game Boy hardware. Realizing this fact, Capcom director Yoshiki Okamoto approached Miyamoto with a plan to remake the original 2 NES Zelda games on the Game Boy Color. And if all went well, they'd follow it up with 4 more original Zelda titles. After only a few months, these 6 games was cut down to 3, then 2. Capcom's subsidiary Flagship began development. The first year was a complete failure, the culprit being not following Miyamoto's footsteps. When developing a game, Miyamoto has one very important rule: gameplay before story. According to Okamoto, the devs did the absolute opposite, resulting in them having to redo the scenario and maps numerous times just for them to fit. So with a buttload of money down the drain and a bunch of time wasted, Okamoto sent out an urgent SOS signal to Miyamoto. With guidance from a greater power, things slowly got back on track. However, the game was heavily delayed all the way to the end of the GBC's life cycle. Released in May of 2001, the 2 games were called The Legend of Zelda: Oracle of Seasons and The Legend of Zelda: Oracle of Ages. Both games have similar story structures. Things carry off after the defeat of Ganon in A Link to the Past. Link visits a castle where he is transported by the Triforce to the land of Holodrum and then Labrina. In each area, Link must go through challenges to save an oracle. On top of that, using passwords, players could enjoy a linked ending between the 2 games, which is pretty awesome. In my opinion, the Oracle series are among the best on the Game Boy Color library. Whether you enjoy some good old time travel or stunning season changes, it can all be found here. Oracle of Ages revolves around Link traveling back and forth in time to solve puzzles. For example, you might find yourself in the past fending off monsters to save the baby Makutree's life, so she can be there in the future to help you. In Oracle of Seasons, what stood out the most for me was how the devs made full use of the GBC's color palette for each season. I mean, what pleasures in Hyrule are better than indulging your eyes on the beautiful shades that stretch over the land of Holodrum in autumn? Okay, I digress. On the other hand, if you've played Link's Awakening, getting into the 2 Oracle games will be a breeze, since the gameplay heavily borrows from that formula, while small improvements were made here and there. Even though the Oracle series experienced a rough development period, the games turned out very nicely. As a result, Nintendo decided to renew their partnership with Capcom, though this time with 4 Links. We now turn the page to a new chapter for portable gaming, as the Game Boy Advance takes center stage. With improved hardware, Capcom's initial intention of recreating an original Zelda title was becoming more practical. It was then decided on A Link to the Past. However, Capcom wanted to take advantage of the GBA's connectivity. Since Zelda games are so puzzle-orientated, they decided to include a co-op mode, where players had to work together to solve them, and included it as part of the remake. The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords was released in December of 2002. It was included in the remake of A Link to the Past for the GBA. Events in 4 Swords carry off many years after the Minish Cap. Imprisoned in the legendary 4 Sword, Vati the evil mage breaks the weakened seal and kidnaps Princess Zelda, while Link kinda just loafs there like he's watching an action movie. As he snaps out of it, a few fairies tell him to take the 4 Sword and defeat Vati. Everyone knows Capcom for their awesome titles, but to come up with the idea of a multiplayer Zelda? Just wow. You gotta give it to them. The world in 4 Swords is split up into 4 areas, each with unique puzzles that can only be solved cooperatively. Yes, that means you can't play this game alone, which really sucks. What? An anniversary edition? With single player support? Oh god, why Nintendo? Why? If you can gather some friends to play, it's definitely worth it. Starting a fire with sparks, lifting a boulder together, and even just killing monsters together is a blast. Though of course, if you are the lucky bunch that got the anniversary edition, you'll be able to enjoy the game alone. Which is nice, cause Nintendo should realize not everyone has friends hanging around with GBAs and link cables laying around. Personally, I've never played 4 Swords with 4 friends before, but I think I can imagine the chaos and ruckus that would ensue. Well guys, that wraps up part 3. So far, Miyamoto and the EAD team hasn't failed to overwhelm gamers across the world with each new console entry for Zelda. In the next part, we'll be looking at a fresh new perspective on Zelda that unfortunately sparked up some controversy. And before we go, I just want to give a quick shout out to EastBeastFilms, who's responsible for the awesome intro you saw in the beginning and that small animation in our video. He makes other cool animations on his channel, so go check him out. And until part 4, I'll see you guys next time.